Hi, my name is Stevem Maxwellem. I'm 63 years young. I've been a professional personal trainer for more than 43 years. I now go around the world basically teaching my exercise system and my health philosophy. I was a martial artist starting from the age of 10. I was involved with the martial art of wrestling. I was a pretty good wrestler. After university, I was looking for something to replace wrestling, and I discovered Gracie Jiu-Jitsu about 1989. So I was one of the first Americans to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the Gracie family. I received my black belt in the year 2000 from the second son of Master Elio Gracie, and that was Helson Gracie. So I've been a black belt now for almost 17 years. It's been a real joy to be training with Jiu-Jitsu. I found it to be the real love of my life. And yeah, that's just basically my basic credentials and background. After I graduated from university, I was teaching health and physical education in the public schools. And in the United States, all sports are run through the school system, so it's all part of the education. And I had wrestled NCAA Division I in college, and I loved that sport so much. I lived for it, really. All my training was centered around becoming a better wrestler. But after university, you know, what's a man to do? I had a family, I had a job to do, so finding time to wrestle was very, very difficult. I needed something else. So I was always looking, tried Muay Thai, I tried Kung Fu, Japanese karate, various striking arts, but I didn't really enjoy them very much. I really missed wrestling. And I discovered the Gracie family. This was 1989. They did a seminar at Hunter College in New York City. At that time, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was unheard of. In fact, I couldn't understand. Every time I heard someone say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I said to myself, well, wait, you mean Japanese, right? And they say, no, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so once I read the history and understood how the Gracie family had became so famous and so good, I wanted to train with them. So I took that first seminar, and then I decided I'm going to really learn this martial art and devote myself to it. At that time, I had my own gym. Right about 1990, I had set up my own gym called Maxwell in Philadelphia, and I put some mats at the side. And I would go out to California and take lessons from the Gracie brothers. They were all together at that time. And then I would come back and I would train with my friends. Before you knew it, I had so many people, I had to expand my mat space. So I went upstairs. The floor above me in my building, it was 4 floors, was deserted. There was nothing up there. So my landlord told me I could have it for the jiu-jitsu. So I bought a bunch of mats, and the program just kept expanding. At that time, I wasn't really qualified to teach, but there was nobody else to teach. So having been a wrestling coach, I knew how to organize practice. I knew how to organize a good workout session. So I would do the best I could, and even though I was really only a blue belt at that time. And I had over 250 people coming in. Their names were on the list. They never showed up at once, thank God. But I mean, there was over 250 members to our little jiu-jitsu club at that time. And then, of course, as I kept going to the Gracies, I kept increasing my rank. And then I began to bring them to Philadelphia. I thought, well, it takes a lot of time to go out and spend time in California. Why not bring them to me? So I was very fortunate. I actually had the first Gracie seminar in Philadelphia. I did many seminars with them that I organized, my ex-wife and myself organized in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I got a lot of flying time, as they say, with the Gracies to perfect my technique. But having come from a wrestling background, it was much easier for me to learn jiu-jitsu than a person that didn't have wrestling. So I found I was able to climb up the ranks. I actually achieved purple belt rank in a little over a year, which is pretty fast for purple belt. But it was because of the wrestling background. But I stayed there for a long time, and at purple belt, and then a really long time at brown belt, and finally achieved the black belt from Gracie in Honolulu. So I guess I've been doing jiu-jitsu since 1989, and it's a pretty long time. But it's been a real love affair. I originally started because I felt like I wanted a self-defense system. I didn't feel comfortable with karate or the kung fu and the Muay Thai boxing. I'm a small guy. I lived in a rough town. Philadelphia's a blue-collar town. A lot of tough guys there, you know. I never felt confident in my skills of striking. But once I understood the philosophy of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and learned the self-defense aspect, I had a lot of confidence. I felt really like I could really defend myself and take care of myself well. So my main purpose, in my original purpose for even seeking the Gracies out, was to learn their self-defense. I was very lucky when I first started Jiu-Jitsu. The Gracie family was all one big happy family. Everyone was together. Of course, Master Elio Gracie lived in Brazil, but when I first started, Horion, the oldest son, an unbelievable teacher, best teacher I've ever seen in any field of any subject. I would have to rate Horion Gracie as maybe one of the best teachers I've ever experienced. His brother, Halson Gracie, fantastic teacher. A little bit different in his teaching style, but his self-defense was superb. He had a little bit different technique than his brothers, but he had a lot more experience actually in real street fights. So I felt like his expertise in that subject might have been a little higher level than some of his brothers. I had a chance to train with Hickson Gracie in my early days. The guy was so good, I just didn't appreciate just how good he was at that time. I was still too new to the game to understand. I had a chance to spend time with Hoyler Gracie, and I spent a lot of time with Hoist Gracie. Hoist actually lived with me for a while in Philadelphia, and I had a chance to spend much time with him out in California. And I would say probably Horion and Hoist had the biggest influence on me when I first started learning. And then, of course, later, Halson Gracie. And I was also very fortunate to work with Master Elliot Gracie. Horion started the instructor training program. There was such a great demand for Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in the United States that there was a lot of fake instructors. People putting on the black belts that weren't black belts. Brazilian guys coming up from Brazil and putting, they would be a purple belt when they got on the plane, and mysteriously their belt would change to black by the time they landed in Miami. And so there was a lot of that going on. So Horion wanted to make sure that there was qualified instructors to teach the family style of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And the main difference between Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the teaching style and the emphasis on the self-defense part of the program, which, as I said earlier, that's the main reason I did it. So all of the brothers were fantastic teachers, but I'd say in my early development, Horion and Hoist were the biggest. And then later I had a chance in the instructor training program. I was the first person to graduate and be certified in that program. And Master Elliot Gracie was there a lot, so I got a chance to actually drink from the source of the well through Master Elliot. And I also stayed with him for a month at his farm in Terrazopolis. That was an amazing experience, those 4 weeks. So I really was very fortunate to have such good mentors and to be able to learn from these masters of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. As I said earlier, one of the reasons I started Jiu-Jitsu was to learn how to defend myself, to be safe in the streets. And I saw the Jiu-Jitsu self-defense as quite good. Later, however, I got very enamored with the competition. There's like two different things going on in jiu-jitsu. You have competitive jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu, and then you have the self-defense where it's like jiu-jitsu against the rest of the world, basically. So my roots were in the self-defense, but being a kind of competitive guy, I got really into the tournament scene for a long time. I had a team, a competition team. I myself competed in the age group. The age group divisions are very fair. It's your weight, your age, and your belt rank, so it couldn't be any more fair. And I won many titles in the competition thing. But recently I see a trend in jiu-jitsu I don't like very much, and that's where it's all sport. There's even high-level black belts who are very good in the sport. They're tough guys, they're incredibly good, but they don't even know the basics of the self-defense, and I think that's a shame, because the stand-up self-defense aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is excellent. So I encourage anyone watching out there, even if you're a very good tournament competitor, do yourself a favor and learn the basics of the street defense. It really can give you a lot of confidence. It can back up your game. If you're a teacher, for sure, you want your blue belt and purple belt, white belt students to know how to defend themselves against a bully, a mugger, a terrorist kind of guy. You never know when you might need this stuff. I've had two aspects to my career. One, I was a trainer. I was always interested in personal training and strength coach. And of course the other was playing and competing in jiu-jitsu and being part of not only the competition aspect of jiu-jitsu, but also teaching the basics. And I love both. I have a love of training, but I also have a love for the jiu-jitsu. I was always looking for ways to make myself a better athlete. And I had read about the kettlebell in a strength journal called Milo magazine, a really interesting strength journal, comes out 4 issues a year. And there was a very humorous article written in there by a guy, a former Russian guy, Pavel Tsatsouline. And I liked the article so much. I thought it was very funny, but very interesting. And I met him, and we decided to create an organization called the RKC, the Russian Kettlebell Challenge, or the Russian Kettlebell Certification. And at that time, when I first heard about the kettlebell, there were no kettlebells in the United States. There had been in the early days, they called them ring weights. Many German immigrants brought these weights with the big round handle on the top. And they were popular with the old-time strongmen in doing circus acts and vaudeville. They would perform in front of the audiences. And the day before even radio, or before there was television or anything, or even movies, people were entertained often by going to circuses and watching people perform magic tricks, actual live plays, and oftentimes they would have strongmen perform stunts and lifting feats of strength, and the kettlebell favored as part of that. So they were known in the U.S., but most people had forgotten. And there had been a very developed system of kettlebell exercise that had been developed by the Russians for their military and some of their athletes. So I got very interested in this, very curious. And having grown up as a child in the 50s and 60s, of course there was the Iron Curtain, as they say. And we were always curious about what the other side was doing. But because of the politics at the time, anything from the Eastern Europe was very exotic and very exciting to American people. And many athletes were always wanting to find out how the people train. I noticed in the Olympics, for example, many of the Eastern Bloc athletes were just really amazing, really strong and very fit, And I always liked the way their face never showed any emotion. And so when I had the chance to learn about this Russian kettlebell training, I jumped on it. And there was a manufacturing equipment company called Torque Athletic that started making kettlebells. They were the first ones in the U.S. At that time, they were really expensive. And I just maxed out a credit card. I actually spent $10,000 and bought just a whole bunch of kettlebells of every size. And once I understood how to use the kettlebell, I started doing group classes. It was the first of its type in the United States. No one had ever attempted to do group classes with kettlebells. There were group fitness classes, mostly for women, aerobic dance exercise, but I was looking for something to get the guys involved. But ironically, I still had a lot of women in the class. Women seemed to like group exercise classes more so than guys. But I had plenty of guys come in because the kettlebell, it was macho enough to really attract them. And I devised a complete system. I call it the Maxwell kettlebell system. I even teach certifications in this system. And it's basically on how to conduct group training and also how to teach people to use a kettlebell safely. It has nothing to do with kettlebell competitions or kettlebell sport. It's all 100% on how to use a kettlebell as a training tool to get people healthy and fit, and as an anti-aging tool. So it's a little bit different than the sport. And I call it the Maxwell kettlebell system. So yeah, I was like one of the pioneers in the United States. Certainly the first guy to actually teach group classes. There are many systems of training that work extremely well for keeping you fit and strong, not only for sport, but for life. Before I discovered kettlebells, I was in great shape. And I had always lifted weights with both barbell and dumbbell. I even liked machine. I was particularly fond of hammer strength machines. I thought they were quite excellent machines. I had spent some time training on Nautilus machines. So anything can work. But my favorite always, of course, was bodyweight training. I always enjoyed the freedom of not having to have any equipment at all. You can just go out in a park. As long as you can find something to pull on, you can get a great workout. And I still enjoy that to this day. I travel so much. I don't travel with a kettlebell. That would be really quite cumbersome and inconvenient. So now most of my training is spent equipment free with my body weight. But when I do get a chance to stay in one spot, of course I will use a kettlebell. And when you combine kettlebell training with body weight training, you have a fantastic program. It makes a really, really nice, well-balanced program. Very sustainable, very safe. One of the main points of training for me is not getting injured. If you as a trainer are injuring people, then you really don't know what you're doing. You should take a hard look at what you're doing and why. And if you are getting hurt when you work out, you're making a big mistake. If anything, properly conducted exercise should prevent injuries, not cause injuries. So if you are creating injuries in your body from training, then you really don't know what you're doing. You're not training properly at all. There's a big confusion between recreation versus exercise. All right, recreation is like sports, like running, swimming, surfing, windsurfing. Jiu-Jitsu would be a recreational pursuit, any kind of martial art, soccer, basketball. These things do not meet the 5-point definition of true exercise. The only thing that can be considered true exercise is strength training. Increases strength, endurance, cardiorespiratory, helps prevent injuries, and improves mobility and flexibility. If your activity doesn't include all those things, then it can't be construed as true exercise. Now, there are many many activities that have exercise benefit, like swimming, you see. But if you look at each one of these things carefully, you'll find that it doesn't meet the 5-point definition of true exercise. So it's an important distinction. And as I said before, your exercise program should enable you to play the recreational sports that you love. But you should not be getting hurt in your training. Now, if you're playing tough sports like soccer or team handball, or on the if you're on the jiu-jitsu mat, of course you're going to get hurt. You expect to get hurt. You play tough boy sports, you're going to ding yourself up. You're going to get an elbow or a rib injury, or it just happens. It's just part of the game, and you accept that. But what I don't accept is people injuring themselves when they're doing their weight training, their strength training, or even their kettlebell training. If you're using good technique and good form, it should be making your body tougher and more resilient, so that you can play those other sports more safely. I had the opportunity to work with some very high level athletes in the jiu-jitsu game as a strength and conditioning coach. It started with Gracie. I prepared him for his first 4 UFC fights. Royce was chosen to represent the Gracie family because he was not very athletic or very strong. He was tall, he was very wiry and thin, but he was relatively weak, had great flexibility, but when you looked at him, he didn't look like a fighter. He had a very handsome face, really sweet personality, smiled a lot, very easygoing, but he was basically skinny. And Ryan thought that he would be the perfect example of how effective jiu-jitsu could be against people that don't know jiu-jitsu. And Royce definitely proved how effective jiu-jitsu can be by winning those UFCs. It was just an amazing thing. His strength training program was basic strength training exercises. I used the 5-pillar method of the push-pull, both horizontal and vertical, hinging and squatting. His program is very basic. This is actually before the time I got into kettlebells. This is in the early 90s. His first UFC was 93. And I started working with him just prior to that. And we were basically just doing chin-ups and dips and push-ups, body weight squats, just very, very basic body weight calisthenics, just to give him a general strength training. His specific conditioning needs were met on the mat, where he would wrestle multiple opponents. We would line people up on the wall, and every 2 minutes we'd send a new guy in. We call that the shark bait drill. Absolutely brutal drill. So that by the time you've been in that game for 10 minutes or so, wow, you can get really tired. Even if you're an amazing black belt guy, even blue belts can start making you tap because you get so tired, because you just keep putting fresh guys. That was one drill that we used to use. But Royce got his specific cardio conditioning on the mat, and he got his strength needs met with 2 weekly workouts with me using just basic general exercise, because that's what he needed. He needed to improve his arm pulling strength and his pushing strength, because he had very long arms, so it's hard for guys with long arms to push or pull the weight. But I'm very happy to say that we more than doubled his strength from the time he started. In fact, he was about 2.5 times stronger than what he was at the beginning of the program. It doesn't have to be rocket science. Other guys I trained were the Ibero brothers. Both needed a lot of cardio, and they needed a lot of conditioning. The problem was they were so good and so technical that there was no one to push them on the mat, even with shark bait drills. Their jiu-jitsu was such a high technical level, there was no one to really push them. So I had to create an artificial way of simulating what it would be like for them to fight another world-class athlete. For these guys, I used the kettlebell training, and I did kettlebell complexes mixed with pull-ups and core work, and we also did some rehabilitation work. I did separate work for the neck, the wrist and the fingers, and the feet and the calves. But the bulk of the work was primarily with kettlebell complex and pull-ups. because they had a little bit different need than boys. They needed a more specific metabolic conditioning and cardio work. And then after they completed the kettlebell complex workout, then we would have them wrestle. At that point, they were so fatigued that now they had to use 100% technique because they had no energy, nothing now. And they were really pushed. They were really pushed because at that point then even mediocre jiu-jitsu guys could give them a hard time and put them on the defense, put them in the rep. So it was a little bit different training philosophy. But I've been very fortunate in my training career. I had a chance to work with a little bit, not too much. Did a few consultations with Gunnar Nelson, amazing athlete from Iceland. I had a chance to work with Hillian Gracie at one point. I've worked with Diego Sanchez in MMA. I had a chance to work with Ronnie Yaya and Hickson Gracie's son, Kron Gracie. So I've been very, very lucky to been able to train these fantastic athletes, and it was really quite pleasurable to work with people of their caliber. A lot of people ask me what is the most important aspect in preparing yourself for a jiu-jitsu season or competition or whatever. Most jiu-jitsu guys are never out of season. There is no season. It's just like year-round, so you're always training. And it differs with each person because everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses. Some guys are really, really strong and have a lot of power, but very poor mobility and poor flexibility. So they should work on their flexibility, maybe not so much strength. Many guys that go into jiu-jitsu are so powerful, they just want to use muscle and power, and they get away with throwing smaller, weaker people around. The problem with that is they will never develop their skill of jiu-jitsu. And the moment they come up against a guy equally strong as them, they will lose because they haven't developed the technique. Master Elliot Gracie told me once that the hardest person to teach jiu-jitsu to is a really, really strong, fit guy. That it's actually easier to teach people that aren't so strong. With jiu-jitsu, I found that there are many chronic overuse injuries. Jiu-jitsu could really mess your posture up, for example, especially if you spend a lot of time in the guard. So you got to do a lot of posture corrective exercises. Oftentimes with submission wrestling and jiu-jitsu, judo, these grappling sports, it's not so much about working the muscles that you use. It's about working the muscles that you don't use to keep balance in the body. So for that reason, I do a lot of, like I said, posture work, a lot of rear shoulders, really important to keep for shoulder health. The grip gets so much work in jiu-jitsu that doing extra grip work often works against you. So I'm very into using a rubber band and opening the fingers and adducting, so working the muscles that open the fingers, working the top of the forearm because you're constantly gripping and overdeveloping the flexors, but nothing for the extensors. So it's all about balance, you see. The hip flexors get extremely strong in jiu-jitsu. But oftentimes the abdominals suffer, or the lower back is not particularly strong. I find a lot of jiu-jitsu guys, their glutes, the gluteal muscles, their butt muscles, are not firing and they're not very functional. So it's not uncommon for many jiu-jitsu guys to have knee and low back problems. Oftentimes that's the result of having very weak glutes. Knee problems can also be very closely tied in with weak feet and ankles. Because jiu-jitsu is primarily played from the mat, the strength of the feet and the ankles is not taxed as much as it is, let's say, in wrestling or judo. So many guys, their feet and ankles are not particularly strong. So it's all about looking at each individual guy, assessing his posture, looking at his strengths and his weaknesses, and working from there. So there's no such thing as a set program that's good for everybody. It's just not true. Guys with good strength and have poor endurance, they need to work on their endurance. Guys that have great endurance but are really weak, they need to work on building absolute strength. So, you know, when I would train people, I would do an assessment and then I would come up with an individual program for each fighter. One of the least understood aspects of training is the recovery. As the intensity goes up, in other words, as your effort goes up in your training, the longer the recovery you need. As the intensity goes up, the volume must go down. Because jiu-jitsu is so much fun, and many guys just absolutely love getting to the mat, there's a real tendency to overdo it and just train too much too often. Now, it is possible to train a lot if you keep the training light and relaxed. But that's kind of difficult, especially when you're a white belt or a blue belt. You don't have any control over the workouts. Your teacher controls the workouts. So if you go to class, pretty much your instructor is going to tell you what to do. But rest is where all the magic happens. Exercise in itself, and even training in itself with the jiu-jitsu, that's not what makes you stronger. It's the rest space in between each training session. That's where the body has a chance to adapt and become a little bit stronger and more fit. Many guys in jiu-jitsu seem to suffer from the more is better philosophy, and they very quickly find themselves overtrained, burnt out, getting injured, getting sick. These are ways that you can tell if you're getting frequent colds, or you're sick a lot, or you feel tired when you get up in the morning and you have trouble getting out of bed. If you need to drink a lot of coffee each day, if your libido, your desire for sex is like really low, these are all good chances that you're probably overtraining. Another really good way to tell if you're doing too much is you take your morning resting pulse rate, either at your carotid or your radial. On the iPhone, there's an app, and you put your finger right there in the camera lens, and it takes your morning resting pulse. You should figure out what your average resting heart rate is over the course of a week, and then each morning, if your heart rate is 5 beats or more higher than your average, you should not train that day. That means you have not recovered. So these are ways that you can self-monitor to make sure that you get the proper recuperation. Because once again, exercise is only the stimulus. What the true adaptation only can occur during rest. So if you're one of those guys that's on the mat like 5, 6, 7 days a week, and you're always pushing it, you're probably overtrained. And you would actually, I know it's hard to believe, but you would actually get better results if you would train less. And also, for all you guys over 40 out there, your recovery rate goes down as you get older, so it takes even longer. I would say for the average guy between 40 and 50, 4 times would be the max you should ever be in the mat. 3 would be better. And if you're over 50, no more than 3 times a week. That's plenty. You're not going to recover if you do more than that, and you're just going to get hurt. Now, you can go to the gym and you can practice just technique with no stress. You can do that almost every day. The problem is, if you're not running the program, you might get pushed into actually training. So you'd be better off just staying off the mat altogether. A very important aspect of health, of course, is diet. You need to have a good, nourishing diet if you want to be strong and healthy. There's no way around it. You want to avoid those fast foods. You want to avoid the sugars. You want to avoid the trans fats that are in a lot of modern product. So I personally advocate for all my athletes, and myself, I'm very strict on this, is I try to avoid all processed food as much as possible. Anything in a plastic wrap, bottles and cans, I prefer to stay away from that as much as possible. Now, I know sometimes it's not possible, but I try to steer away. And the bulk of the food should be fresh fruits and vegetables. If you're eating a lot of good fresh fruit and a lot of good fresh vegetables, you're probably pretty healthy. But I know some guys that don't eat any at all. It's unbelievable. Some people have come to me, and I have them list their diet, and I'll see that they have no salads, no good fresh or cooked vegetables, no fruit at all. It's like, wow, man, you're really missing a lot of benefit there. Many athletes try to make up for a poor diet by using supplements. I don't believe in supplements at all. I used to believe. I used to spend a lot of money on supplements. As a matter of fact, I used to spend $325 a month. That's a lot of money. $325 a month on supplements. And you know what? I felt better when I quit. I finally just quit. I read some very negative research about vitamins, and I realized I was just wasting my money. I believed all that ad copy in some of the health journals and magazines, and it's mostly just complete nonsense. And I didn't notice one difference when I stopped taking the supplements. If anything, I actually felt better. And there's this big push for protein, protein, protein. Yes, a hard-working athlete who's training a lot could use slightly higher level of protein, but it doesn't need to be that much. You can easily get your protein needs met with just normal food. If you're eating meat and eggs and some cheeses and some other type of dairy products like cottage cheese, you're getting all the protein that you need. You do not need to take extra protein supplements. And I'm not in favor of eating a lot of small meals. I think 3 basic meals, in some cases even 2, is all you need. If you are constantly eating every couple hours, you are overburdening your digestion. Your digestive system never gets a rest. It's a chronic state of digestion. You want to avoid that. So 3 meals, 4 to 5 hours apart a day. The bulk of your food should be fresh fruit and vegetables, supplemented with lean meats and some cheeses, chicken and fish. And for people that are lean and use a lot of energy, a good starch meal. But starch, it could be any kind of grain or rice or potatoes or sweet potatoes, something like this. If you're fat, you need to create a deficit. You don't need starch. If anything, you need to eat less, and in order to encourage your body to burn the excess body fat. But that's my basic take in a diet. It's actually pretty simple, really, and it's just basically goes back to eating, just good wholesome food. And it's very easy to find that food in Europe. I found the food in Poland to be absolutely delicious. So that, for you Polish athletes, there's no excuse to not have a good diet. Good food was very easily found when I stayed there. I turned 63 last December, and I have to tell you, I still feel pretty good. I can feel that I've lost shape, lost a little muscle, and my performance is down a little bit. But when I look around and I look at other guys my age, I find that I'm doing pretty good. And I think the secret to that is I just never stopped training. I just always stayed with it. Now, I don't get a chance to get on the mat that much anymore. I do not get a chance to swing kettlebells very much anymore because I'm constantly on the road traveling, which is a bit of a stress, actually. Flying can be hard on your body. Just the act of flying in an airplane at elevation and breathing the air and so forth can be a bit of a stress. But I make sure I get a lot of sleep. I get as much sleep as I need. I don't set an alarm. I just go to bed early every night, and whenever I wake up, I wake up. And I usually find I get about 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep. That's the #1 thing for recovery, sleep. Probably even more important in some ways than diet, getting a good night's sleep. I'm absolutely impeccable with my food. I combine my foods very carefully. I don't mix starch and protein. I get lots of fresh produce in my diet every day. I don't eat big amounts of food. I think that's a big mistake. A lot of people eat a lot, but they don't really digest it because they eat too fast. And a lot of that food sits in the gut and doesn't even get digested. And that really overburdens the system. So I eat carefully. I chew my food very carefully. Drink plenty of liquid and water. And I never stop training. Never stopped. I always, throughout my whole life, would work out. My workouts have gone down in intensity a little bit because I find I don't recover quite like I used to. And every single day I do some form of joint mobility. As a matter of fact, there's the Russian Slavic health system that even many Russians and Polish people do not know. I learned it many years ago. Wow, it's fantastic. So your own native health system is one of the best in the world. I also mix in Chinese Qigong. I like to do a lot of crawling and other type of mobility drills. I think this becomes even more important for guys once they get 40 years old and beyond, to do lots of daily mobility drills. I still do some yoga and some flexibility work. Probably should do a little bit more, actually. It was always one of my least favorite things to do. Most guys hate stretching, but I do stretch, and I do try to fit it in. And I do like running. I do realize that running doesn't meet the 5-point definition of exercise, but as a recreation I find it very enjoyable. It does confer good cardio benefits, so I still go out and run, but nice and slow, and I really emphasize the breath in the breathing. That was something I discovered relatively later in life, that I was using a dysfunctional breathing. I've studied breathing very carefully, and I'm very strict now with nasal only breathing for my daily regimen, and only during extremely heavy, exhausting exercise will I'll allow myself mouth exhale, but you should never inhale through the mouth, always nose, and this is a big mistake many people make, and it's very much tied into aging and your energy and your general health. If you're a mouth breather or you use dysfunctional upper chest breathing, you're doing yourself great harm. So all these things tied together has allowed me to remain pretty fit and pretty strong. I almost never get sick. I can't even remember the last time I was sick. I occasionally, due to travel stress, I'll get like a little cold last couple days. Just fast and I don't eat, and then I'm right back, to normal health again. But yeah, these are some of the things that I've done to keep myself well preserved. And I teach these in many of my seminars, many of these health techniques that I've learned over my 50 years of training. This year was my first time in Poland, and I must say I really loved it. It was fantastic. I had a great time. I found the Polish people to be a very good-looking people. It seems that the health of the Polish people is much higher than many places in the world. I think it's because you haven't been ruined by a lot of the fast food industry, like in the States and even China and parts of Asia. It's terrible what's happened to the people. But in Poland, it was like a little pocket of people that have great health habits, really good food. The women are all beautiful, the men are all strong and handsome. It was just a real pleasure to be there. And at my seminars, I never saw so many fit, healthy people in all my life. So I love coming back to Poland. It was very enjoyable for me. I find it a really good place to be. I plan to come back to Poland. I'm really looking forward to it because I did have such a good experience. I'm looking at this date here. It looks like Saturday the 20th of May I'll be in Gdynia. I'll be working with the Wolfpack gang. I don't know how to say that in Polish, but I had a chance to work at that martial arts school there in Gdynia. Wow, great martial arts school, really high level of students. And I look forward to going back there and doing a Gracie JIU-JITSU seminar. And then it looks like in Wrocław, I'm killing that name, man, but I'll be there in Wrocław, 27 and 28 May, to do some mobility conditioning and some kettlebell work. I'll show my exercise system. So all you have to do is go on my website, Maxwell. sc.com, www.maxwellsc.com, and if you go to my events page, I have a whole list of where I am. I usually spend a lot of time in Europe, in Schengen, and you can find all sorts of seminars and all different subjects, from breathing to mobility to body weight training, to kettlebells, to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense. So I'm all over the map. So hopefully for you listeners out there, I'll see you at one of the seminars soon. Please come up and introduce yourself to me and let me know what you think.